Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're really going to dig into one specific part of the source material you shared.
Yeah, we're focusing on Chapter 3 from Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score. It's called The Brain from Bottom to Top.
And it's absolutely crucial stuff. This chapter gets right down to the nuts and bolts, doesn't it?
It really does. It lays out the science, the actual brain science, behind how trauma changes us. It's not just feelings, it's biology.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack those core ideas. How does trauma physically change the brain? And why is understanding that so vital for understanding the effects and finding ways to heal?
It helps make sense of why things feel the way they do after trauma.
Yeah.
Why the body seems to hold on to it. Because, the brain literally reorganizes itself.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this then. Where does the chapter start? The brain's main job.
Survival.
Yeah.
Pure and simple. Before anything else, the brain's #1 priority is keeping the organism alive.
Even under, terrible circumstances.
Especially then. Happiness, connection, all that comes second to just getting through.
And the chapter breaks down what that survival job actually entails, right? 5 specific things the brain has to do.
Exactly. 5 key functions. First, it needs to generate internal signals, telling us what the body needs.
Like hunger, thirst, rest.
Yeah, precisely. Food, water, sleep, safety, those basic internal cues. You need to know what you need.
Okay, that makes sense. Function 1, know your internal needs. What's 2?
Create a map of the world. Not just any map, but one that shows you where to satisfy those needs you just felt.
So where's the food, where's the shelter, where's the danger, that kind of thing.
Exactly. A practical, needs-based map of your environment.
Got it. Needs map. 3rd.
Generate energy and action. You know the need, you know where to meet it. Now you need the juice and the movement to actually get there.
So motivation and physical action.
Yeah.
Getting up and doing something.
Right. Translating the map and the need into behavior.
Okay. 4th function.
Warn of dangers and opportunities. The brain has to be constantly scanning. Like a lookout. Is that safe? Is that risky? Is that something potentially good?
The vigilance system. Always on alert.
Mm-hmm. And 5th, finally, adjust actions based on the moment. Flexibility. If plan A doesn't work or the situation changes suddenly, you need to be able to shift gears quickly.
Adaptability. Okay, so internal signals, world map, energy action, danger opportunity watch, and flexible adjustment. The chapter stresses that for us humans, as mammals, this isn't a solo act.
Absolutely not. These functions rely heavily on coordination within groups. We're social creatures. Our survival is deeply intertwined with others.
And this is where the chapter connects it all to psychological problems when these systems get disrupted.
Yeah, that's when things go wrong. If your internal signals are off, if your map is faulty, if you're paralyzed, if you misread threats, if you can't adapt, or if your social connections break down, your fundamental survival toolkit is compromised.
And the really stark point the chapter makes is that trauma can mess with all of these, every single one.
It's a system-wide shock. It forces the brain to reorganize everything around the immediate threat, potentially disrupting all those core survival functions long-term.
Which brings us to the specific brain areas involved in that immediate response. The emotional brain, as the chapter calls it.
Right. It lumps together the really old parts, the reptilian brain, which handles basic life support like breathing and heart rate, and the limbic system, which is heavily involved in emotions, memory, motivation.
And this emotional brain's main job?
Looking out for your welfare, constantly scanning, mostly unconsciously, asking, is this safe? Is this good for me? Is this dangerous?
And it communicates not with words, but with feelings, sensations.
Exactly. It signals danger or opportunity by releasing hormones, which create those visceral physical sensations. That gut feeling, that sudden jumpiness, or maybe just a mild sense of unease.
Even subtle feelings we might not consciously register.
Oh, yeah. Those gut feelings strongly influence our choices every day, often without us realizing why we prefer one thing or avoid another. It's the emotional brain guiding us.
Okay, so how does information from the outside, sights, sounds, smells, get processed by this system? The chapter details a specific pathway involving the thalamus.
Yes, the thalamus is key. It's like a central relay station deep in the limbic system. All the raw data from your eyes, ears, nose, skin converges there first.
The chapter uses that great analogy, the thalamus is the cook.
It is. It takes all these separate ingredients, sight, sound, touch, smell, and stirs them together into a cohesive soup.
The soup being our unified sense of experience. This is what's happening to me right now.
Precisely. It integrates everything into a continuous autobiographical story of the present moment.
Giving us that sense of being whole and present. So where does the info go from the thalamus?
It splits off on the two main roads simultaneously. There's the low road, as Joseph Ledoux termed it.
Which the chapter discusses.
Right. It's a super fast, sort of quick and dirty path straight down to the amygdala.
The amygdala, the brain's smoke detector, right.
Yeah.
Those little almond-shaped bits.
Exactly. Danger detector. The low road is built for speed, bypassing conscious thought. Think. See something snake-like, jump back before you even consciously register snake.
Pure reflex. And the other path.
That's the high road. It's a bit slower, takes a few more milliseconds. It travels up from the thalamus to the frontal lobes.
To the thinking part of the brain. The prefrontal cortex.
Yes, where we have conscious awareness, context, planning, rational thought.
So, low road, fast, unconscious alarm to the amygdala. High road, slower, detailed info to the conscious brain for assessment.
You got it. And here's the critical piece about trauma from Chapter 3. When the stress is overwhelming, the thalamus, the cook, can get completely overwhelmed itself.
Its processing breaks down.
Yeah. It can't make the coherent soup anymore.
So instead of an integrated experience,
You get fragments. The sights, sounds, smells, body sensations get stored as disconnected pieces, like shards of a broken mirror.
not a story, just raw data points.
Exactly. And time perception gets warped. It can feel like time freezes, making the past trauma feel like it's perpetually happening now.
Yeah.
The sequencing breaks down.
That right there explains so much about why traumatic memories feel different. They're sensory fragments, body states, not neat narratives.
It really does. Now let's zoom in on two specific structures. Chapter 3 highlights as central to this alarm response the amygdala and the medial prefrontal cortex, or MPFC.
Okay, amygdala. The fast alarm bell we just talked about, triggered by that low road input.
Right. And the MPFC is part of the frontal lobes, the more evolved part of the brain. It's crucial for self-awareness, understanding context, and really importantly for regulating our emotional responses.
Kind of like the brain supervisor.
Or the brake pedal. In normal situations, the MPFC works closely with the amygdala. It gets the slower, more detailed, high-road information and uses it to assess the situation.
So it can tell the amygdala, hey, calm down, it's not actually a threat.
Precisely. It modulates or dampens the amygdala's alarm. It allows for a conscious assessment, distinguishing real danger from a false alarm, enabling a considered response. That's top-down control. The thinking brain managing the emotional brain.
Okay, so amygdala shouts, fire. MPSC checks and says, nope, just toast.
Good analogy. Now, Chapter 3 talks about this really important Harvard study. They used PTANs.
Right, on veterans listening to recordings of their trauma narratives. This gives us a window into the traumatized brain during re-experiencing.
A direct look. And the findings were stark. First, as the veterans listened, their amygdalas lit up intensely.
Okay, the alarm bell was ringing, LOD. That makes sense.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But here's the kicker.
What happened to the MPFC? The brake pedal?
It went offline. It essentially shut down. The area responsible for regulating the fear, providing context, and maintaining self-awareness just stopped functioning effectively.
Wow, so the brake fails just as the accelerator is floored.
Exactly. And there was another critical finding involving language.
Broca's area.
Yes. Broca's area, the brain's main center for producing language, typically on the left side, also went offline.
So during the flashback, the brain literally loses access to language.
That's what the scans indicated.
Yeah.
And the implications, as the chapter explains, are profound. Without the MPFC online, the brain can't calm the amygdala. It can't tell the difference between the past threat and present safety. The alarm just keeps blaring because the "it's okay now" signal isn't getting through.
The feeling of immediate danger persists because the context checker is offline.
Right. And with Broca's area shut down, the experience becomes fundamentally unspeakable, pre-verbal. You can't find the words because the brain machinery needed to generate them isn't accessible.
The chapter quotes Macbeth, right? Tongue nor heart cannot conceive nor name thee.
A perfect quote for it. The source gives examples. Trauma victims who become mute, kids who stop talking, soldiers struck speechless by horror. It's not refusal, it's neurological unavailability.
And connect that back to the thalamus breakdown. Fragmented sensations, no language. It paints a clear picture of why trauma is so hard to process and talk about.
It's encoded differently, not as a narrative, but as raw sensation, images, terror. It feels like it's happening again right now.
Yeah.
The chapter calls it replaying an old reel.
That image of Stan's brain scan, described in the book Amygdala Blazing, Language Area Dark, really drives it home. His brain wasn't distinguishing past from present at all.
No distinction, which leads to this idea in the chapter that trauma starts out there, but ends up being fought on the battlefield of your own body.
Because the brain's response is so physical, so sensory.
Yeah, The ongoing experience is one of internal chaos, overwhelming sensations, intense emotions, often without a clear conscious link back to the event itself because the thinking, narrating parts were offline during the encoding.
So a major part of healing, the chapter suggests, is actually reconnecting with those internal states, learning to tolerate, identify, and manage those bodily sensations and emotions.
That's presented as a crucial first step. Sensing, naming, identifying what's going on inside. But it's incredibly hard because a common coping mechanism is the exact opposite.
Numbing.
Emotional numbing, trying to shut down that internal battlefield. The chapter uses Tom's story as an example.
Right, feeling distant, like his heart was frozen behind a glass wall.
Yeah, feeling unreal, floating, lacking purpose, barely recognizing himself. It's a desperate attempt to turn down the volume on the internal chaos.
It sounds like a survival strategy in itself.
It is, but it comes at a huge cost. Because when you numb the bad feelings, you inevitably numb the good ones too. You numb the pain, but also the joy, the connection, the feeling of being alive.
The chapter mentions that William James quote.
About sensory insensibility, yeah. Describing someone who felt separated from herself, lacked the faculty of enjoyment, and found life an incomprehensible torture, despite good circumstances. It shows how being cut off from inner sensation kills pleasure and meaning.
And this links to alexithymia, right? Difficulty identifying or describing feelings.
Exactly. The chapter explains that people with alexithymia often register emotions primarily as physical symptoms. So instead of, I feel anxious, it's my stomach hurts, or I have this weird tension or chronic pain that doctors can't explain.
The emotion speaks only through the body, not through conscious feeling words.
Right. And when they get frustrated or overwhelmed because they can't pinpoint what feeling is causing it, they might just shut down further, space out, or lash out with seemingly excessive anger.
And the chapter points out the consequences of this disconnection from the body.
Difficulty with self-protection. You miss the body's warning signs. Higher rates of revictimization. And as we said, real problems, feeling pleasure, connection, purpose.
The body's signals aren't being interpreted correctly or maybe not even received by the conscious mind. That example of Sherry picking at her skin.
It's such a stark illustration. Not necessarily suicidal, but a desperate physical attempt to feel something, anything, to cut through the numbness and feel real, feel alive for a moment.
It's incredibly challenging material, but seeing the brain mechanisms makes the experiences make more, well, biological sense.
It does. It shifts the frame from what's wrong with you to what happened to your brain and body.
Absolutely. And, you know, if this deep dive into the brain's architecture in Chapter 3 is resonating with you, if it's shedding light on things, we'd really appreciate it if you take a second to click the like button.
Yeah, your support genuinely helps us continue making these explorations. And subscribing means you won't miss future deep dives.
Thanks for considering that. Okay, let's get back to the state the chapter describes being organized to survive.
Right. So when that brain alarm goes off, it triggers those automatic, pre-programmed physical responses.
Right.
Fight, flight, or freeze. These are run by the oldest parts of the brain.
And crucially, when those ancient survival circuits kick in, they tend to suppress the higher brain functions.
Exactly. The conscious, rational mind gets partially sidelined to allow for faster, more automatic action. Survival first, thinking second.
So being organized to survive means the body and brain stay stuck in that high alert, ready for threat mode, even when the danger is long gone.
Yeah, the system doesn't reset properly. The baseline level of vigilance remains cranked up.
And here's the paradox the chapter highlights. That state saved you then, but prevents you from fully living now.
Absolutely. You can't feel fully safe, relaxed, or present when your nervous system is constantly braced for impact.
The chapter suggests this might be why traumatic memories can become so persistent in PTSD, because the present moment feels muted or unsafe.
Right. If you can't fully inhabit the here and now because your system is still on alert, the brain might default back to the time when sensations were incredibly intense, even if those sensations were horrific. It's drawn to the intensity, perhaps over the emptiness or subtle unease of the present.
Pulled back to the old real because the current one doesn't feel quite real or secure enough.
Something like that. Now, Chapter 3 doesn't go deep into solutions, but it hints at the directions needed to change this threat detection system. It mentions two main approaches, which would be using the conscious mind, the MPFC, to regulate the emotional brain, thinking your way calm. But as we saw with the Harvard study, that MPFC is often the very thing that's compromised in trauma.
So relying only on talking or rational thought might not work if the brake pedal itself is offline or damaged.
It can be very difficult, yeah. Which points to the other approach,
Bottom up.
working directly with the body's experience, using things like breath work, movement, maybe touch therapies that engage the reptilian brain and limbic system directly to help regulate the nervous system from the ground floor up.
Soothing the physical system first, bypassing the potentially offline cognitive controls.
That's the idea. And the chapter emphasizes it's not just about becoming less reactive to triggers, like through desensitization alone.
Right. The goal isn't just numbness or tolerance.
No, the real challenge is helping people feel fully alive and secure in the present. Bringing those brain structures that shut down the MPFC for self-awareness and regulation, Broca's for language and narrative, the thalamus for integrated experience back online.
So they can actually experience satisfaction, connection, and meaning in ordinary life again. Moving from just surviving to truly living.
That's the essence of it.
So let's bring this home. Why does grasping all this complex brain stuff from Chapter 3 really matter for you, our listener?
Well, because it gives you a concrete biological framework for understanding what can feel like completely baffling and overwhelming experiences.
Like flashbacks feeling utterly real.
Exactly. Knowing the amygdala is hyperactive and the MPFC is offline explains why it feels like it's happening now, why rational thought goes out the window.
And the struggle to find words.
Broca's area being offline explains why trauma can literally leave you speechless. It's not a choice. It's a neurological event.
And the numbness, the disconnection, the weird physical symptoms.
Understanding the thalamus breakdown, the numbing response, alexithymia, it explains feeling detached from your body, not knowing what you're feeling, experiencing emotions as pain, maybe even self-harming to feel something. The internal sensing system got shattered and rewired for survival.
It really emphasizes that trauma isn't just a bad memory or a psychological issue in the abstract. It's a physical, biological change in how the brain operates.
Fundamentally, it affects the most basic systems for perceiving the world, sensing yourself, and staying alive.
Which underscores why healing often needs to involve more than just talking about the past. Why approaches that work with the body, with regulating the nervous system from the bottom up, are often so critical.
Because you need to address the parts of the brain where the trauma is actually stored and replay the emotional brain, the body's sensory systems. Chapter 3 shows us why the body keeps the score. The brain itself changes.
It reorganizes for survival, sometimes at the steep price of feeling fully alive.
A tough reality, but one that also points towards paths for recovery.
So that leaves us with a pretty significant question to ponder, building on everything in this chapter. If trauma does reshape the brain's core architecture for survival, what does it actually take, day to day, therapy by therapy, to consciously and actively rebuild that architecture? How do we rewire for safety, connection, and pleasure in the present, not just brace for threats from the past?
Some things to really think about.
We sincerely hope this deep dive into the brain's mechanics in Chapter 3 has offered some valuable insights. If you found this exploration helpful, please do hit that like button. It really helps others find the show.
And if you want to continue exploring these kinds of topics with us, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive.
Thank you so much for joining us today.